Hi. So I'm going to be emceeing for the rest of the day because it would be nice to have an introduction. I'm Julius, one of the Prometheus co-founders, and the next talk is going to be David de Torres from Sysdig about OSS supply chain, I guess, security, right? So looking forward to that.
Thank you. Well, open source supply chain. There are a lot of ways to talk about this, and I think I chose the one that is not usually done, so expect this to be the most different talk that you will see here in the PromCon. Wish me luck. First, I need to introduce myself. I am David de Torres. I am a believer in the open source, sometimes idealist. I studied science, computer science and anthropology. I have a daughter. I'm allergic to cats. I am a contributor and one of the founders of the PromCon.io open source project here with my colleagues. And right now I'm working at Sysdig as an engineering manager. But why I'm telling you all this personal trivia? Because if we want to talk about open source supply chain, we need to talk about communities. But communities is nothing else than people. And there are people with a common culture and doing things together. And if we want to talk about communities, there are people that has been studying communities all around the world for more than 100 years. And they are anthropologists. So let's use in this talk some of their findings to try to find something deeper in our open source communities. This is one of the anthropologists that I like most. It is Eric Wolf. Eric Wolf did something strange, like that I'm doing right now today. Well, in the anthropology in the 80s, they were talking about big words, like structuralism or functionalism or things like this. Like we are talking now about open source projects and communities and supply chain. Then he took a different approach, and he focused on people. And he used something called micro-stories. And he told the story, personal stories of the people to describe how communities behave and how communities were interacting each other. So let's make an experiment. Let's talk about micro-stories in the open source world. And I will tell mine. This is the one and I know most. But it can be any of you, because most probably mine is not different from yours. I want to start 3 years ago. I was in a company, and I was working in the industrial monitoring. And then in one of my home local meetups, I heard about Prometheus, and then I said, wow, this seems amazing. And I started to install it and test it and try it out. And then in one of these research, I saw this. This happened 3 years ago here. And here, Richard, I don't know, where are you, Richard? Hi. He was talking about the Modbus exporter that he did. And for me, it was fascinating because I was working on that every day. And he was talking about something that I was fighting with. It is how the Modbus devices were storing big numbers. And this is a problem that I was using every day. And he said, well, I only implemented these 2 ways, but there are others. I didn't. And I said, well, this is something I can do. And then it happened that some weeks later, my daughter and my wife went abroad to visit their family, so I had a lot of free time. And I said, well, let's learn Go and try to make this contribution. So I started, and for some days, weeks, I was learning Go, and I entered the Modbus exporter, and I made my first PR, code in PR. And then it was approved. And I was like, oh my God, it was a real hype. So Richard, just because of you, I'm here. Thank you. And well, for me, I was like, oh my God, I'm an open source contributor. And it was such a hype. I started to look for other places to contribute. I also contribute to other exporters. I also was making some things in the industrial protocols that I knew. And then some months later, a company was looking for someone with expertise in the open source Prometheus exporters. And then I was hired by a company called Sysdig to work in an open source project called PromCon.io. And then some months later, here's me during the COVID, while we presented the open source project PromCon.io. There we still try to find the easier way to use exporters for different applications. It was amazing. I mean, a company was paying me for doing something that I was working for fun. It was like the dream job, you know. I was such in a good mood. And we started to work with exporters. And then the fun started to appear. They say, OK, let's go for the CloudWatch exporter. Because I mean, a lot of people are in AWS. They need to look for CloudWatch. But CloudWatch is what it is. They want to use Prometheus. And then we say, let's get the CloudWatch exporter. But wow, there were two CloudWatch exporters. One made by the community, and another one made by someone else. And then we say, OK, let's go for the community one. But then there was something, it was a technical thing that we needed and we wanted to have that the community one did not have. And we looked how to implement it, and then we found that there were some pull requests that were trying to implement it, but for technical reasons, they were closed. And we said, oh my God, we will be the third one that is closed trying to do this. And then we started to talk with Thomas. Thomas is the maintainer of another exporter, the yet another CloudWatch exporter. The name just gives you a hint of this problem. And it is an amazing guy. It is the kind of guy that when you know you want to take him out for beers, and the person that you think when you talk about open source maintainers, that he takes you by the hand and helps you in the process, gives you some ideas, and well, we contributed. And not even that time, we went on with making other contributions and talking to him. We made some virtual coffees during the COVID, and it was an amazing experience to get into another contribution, open source contribution. And then we say, OK, let's go for the next one. Let's go for Azure. And then we found something similar. We found two exporters, one by someone close to the Prometheus community, another one made by someone else that we didn't know who was it. And then we said, OK, the experience was good with the CloudWatch. Let's see what this new guy says. And then we started to talk with him. He was also so kind, and he answered our questions. And then he answered us from an email from a company. And we said, what is this company? What tech company is this? And it was Daimler. And we said, oh, this is the cars company. This is Mercedes-Benz. And what is a cars company doing with a Prometheus exporter? And this was a little bit like making click here in mind, because we thought this was a matter of tech companies and smaller startups making things, and we find an industrial company making Prometheus exporters, and well, it makes something click. And then we went for the MongoDB. MongoDB is the funniest example, because we have one exporter made by someone here that is not modified in the last years, and then there was a fork of this project, and they call it the Percona MongoDB exporter, and it was based in the another one. And then there is another third fork of this one that they call the Percona MongoDB exporter. It's under the Percona organization. So we have something made by an individual that it is maintained now by a company. And then let's try to get into the stories of these things. I told you about Thomas. Thomas wrote this. This is a public blog post where he says and explains that he made yet another CloudWatch exporter while he was working in Envision company. He was working in a company, and he did this because he needed it in his work. But what happened? He left the company. And so who maintains this? The company, him. So he decided to make his own organization and go on maintaining this exporter. And also making some research, we found that Daimler or Mercedes-Benz is also not only having this exporter maintained by this individual, but also officially he's maintaining in his organization another Prometheus exporter for Cosmo. So, as a scientist, I could not understand this because we are having open source communities, we are having companies, and well, in the 90s when I started in the open source world, starting to use Linux, starting to use open source solutions, it was a binary category. Either you was an open source thing or it was a proprietary thing. You know, there was this fight between Microsoft and Linux, and it was outrageous. But, well, it is a good point of a snapshot of there was in that time, The Cathedral and the Bazaar by Raymond. But then I found this other book by Nadia, Working in Public. I totally recommend this because it is a good description, almost anthropological work on how the open source seems right now. We are living in a really interesting times. Before, Microsoft and Linux were fighting open source against the proprietary. Now, Linux is a foundation that moves more money than any of the companies that we work for. Microsoft is one of the companies that contribute with more lines to the open source projects, even to the Linux kernel. And we make our projects in GitHub, that it is not an open source project, but all our projects are hosted there. And we are working in companies that pay us, that we are open source maintainers and open source contributors, developers. But we are professionalized. We are not doing this in our spare time, in our free time, like they were doing in the 90s. And companies started to make business models with open source. We have companies that commercialize an open source product. We have companies that have the product and they open source it. We have companies that they are using projects and not open sourcing it inside and using this for their model. And this is what it looks like, the open source today. Companies are using open source as something of quality, as something that is supported by a lot of people behind, because there are a lot of people. And we have a lot of use cases of a lot of business models that are successful, and companies see this as a way of making money, and they paid us for us. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you are being paid by a company to make open source, please? Great. I'm not alone, thank you. But here, there's a problem. And I want you to get the attention in 2 sentences. This happened 1 year ago. This is Log4j. And this affected, some researchers say, 93% of all the internet. It is even in Mars, this problem, because they put it in the Mars lander. So, I want you to take the attention here. I currently have a full-time job as software architect. I work for Log4j and another open source project that in my spare time. And another one, he says, maintainers have been working sleeplessly on migration issues, fixed logs, whatever, replies to inquiries, yet nothing is stopping people to buzz us for work we are being paid, for feature we all dislike. So what happened when we have things in the open source that companies think they are reliable because it is open source, because we are used to things open source are reliable because supposedly there are hundreds of eyes looking at this. But this is in no one's land because no one's want this, because no one likes, and company don't see a revenue in those things. This was the introduction. I told you this was strange. So let's talk about Prometheus. And this is the difficult part, because Prometheus needs the exporters. Prometheus is just the storage. Prometheus is a warehouse. But if we don't fill the warehouse with things, if we don't fill Prometheus with metrics, Prometheus is useless. you can install a Prometheus server, but if you don't have metrics, it is totally useless. And we have exporters for everything. We have exporters. I told about Modbus, but we all know all the exporters that community supports. We will talk about later. But we have for a lot of different applications. We have for Nginx, Kafka, Apache, Cassandra, Elasticsearch, MySQL, Postgres, Mongo. Anything has an exporter. And, well, we are, as Prometheus community, we are supporting exporters. We have heard about the news in the exporters. But what does it mean, the Prometheus community? We don't have a Prometheus community. We have multiple Prometheus communities. And each of these projects are a different community, because as we said in the beginning, a community is a group of people with a common culture doing things together. And each repository that we have here have a different set of people, and there are different communities. They even have different rules, even if we are the same organization. So let's have a look at different communities that we have. This is first the Prometheus server community. And I made here the sum of the contributors during the last 12 months, last year. And this is amazing, and this is a really healthful community. You can see here, apart from the depend about, okay, this is always there, our friend, we have like 7 people we can see here that has been continuously during the last year making contributions to the source code of the server. We have a lot of PRs, we have a lot of stars. This is a great project. Let's see what happened with exporters. MySQL exporter is a great exporter. Actually, MySQL is one of the databases that is most usually in some kind of instance, mostly legacy and still not migrating to cloud-native things. We need the MySQL exporter. But how many people are contributing during the last year to the MySQL exporter? Well, the first 2 main contributors are the bots, and then we have SuperQ. Thank you. And then we have individual contributions. We only have SuperQ making contributions regularly during the year. If we go to CloudWatch, only 2 people are contributing during the last year regularly to that exporter. And if we go to JMX, it is even worse, because there is only 1 person that is contributing during the last year in a regular way. But you can say, okay, these are applications. Not everyone is using these applications. When we start Prometheus, what is the first exporter that we install? The node exporter. We always install the node exporter. It's the first exporter that we install to get metrics from the node, from the virtual machine, the instance, our local host. Well, here we have, again, a SuperQ. That is the first contributor. And then we have a bot. And, well, then some individual contributors. But we don't have anyone else contributing to the node exporter in a regular basis. SuperQ, if you are seeing this, feel free to use this presentation in your next performance review. I'm not joking. What happens if SuperQ goes on parental leave, or changes his job, or he cannot code by reasons? Who is supporting these exporters? Also happens with the memcache exporter. And the black box exporter, here we also have a Julian, but SuperQ is also the second contributor. There's no one else making regular contributions to these exporters. And we have to think why. Maybe we are, again, like in Log4j, it is a no one's land that it is so appealing for companies to contribute to the Prometheus server, because there is the money, there is the revenue, there is the business opportunity. But who cares about exporters? Who is paying these people to contribute and maintain the exporters? Do we need exporters? This is another question, because exporters made us get here. It allowed us to grow and to get metrics from things without getting involved in the real applications. We were making third-party applications, we were scraping status pages, we were getting to databases, tables, status, and things like this. But this has some backwards. Like, for example, imagine we have an application that we have an exporter, and it has a new release that it has breaking changes in the API or breaking changes in the status page or in the table or how they make the metrics, whatever. When we detect that, do the users have to put an issue in the repo? Do we proactively know about this while they are making this feature? Where do we have this gap? And also, there's a technical thing. Like, we are getting metrics in an indirect way. The Kubernetes community realized that, and first, they adopted the cAdvisor exporter. But right now, they are instrumenting the kubelet to generate the metrics that the cAdvisor was generating, because it has better authority to generate those metrics in an accurate way. And the same thing happened to us. Who has a better authority, the application itself or the status page of the application? Also, there are applications that had an exporter in the past, and right now they're instrumenting metrics, like Harbor or like RabbitMQ. Is this the way that we want to go? And I wanted to raise some questions, and I don't have the answer for them. That's why I didn't write anything here. And some questions are like, if we want and we think the better way is to instrument directly the applications, who should talk with the applications? Should we help them instrument? Should we do this ourselves? We can contribute to these open source projects. We can make a PR in MongoDB. We can make a PR in Redis. We can make a PR in Elasticsearch. They are open source projects. But they're also companies. How does this affect their business project? Nginx, for example, the free version of Nginx do not export metrics, but the enterprise version does. So maybe it's also a part of this business model. Will they accept that? Who is paying for this? Who will sponsor people in the open source community of Prometheus to do this job? I don't know if there is an answer for this that fits all, and I don't know if there is an answer that fits each of the projects or a group of projects. For sure, we will need exporters, for example, for the Node exporter or the Windows exporter. I don't expect Linux directly to expose Prometheus metrics, but maybe we can think of other applications to do that natively. I just wanted to raise this concern or concerns. Maybe we can start from now on conversation of what do we do exporters to be in the future, and what do we want to do with them for now. Well, that's all. And thank you. And as you see, my allergy for the cats was not needed for the conversation. But the rest, it made total sense. Thank you a lot.
All right, are there any questions? No?